Statistics. Is the field racist? Now, students often tell me they dislike statistics for a variety of reasons. They may complain that it's boring, that it's too difficult, that it's ruining their GPA. They may complain, sometimes incorrectly, that it has absolutely nothing to do with their chosen path, their chosen career. But is the field racist, or at least based in racist beginnings? Some of you may be saying, is everything racist now? What are we doing? Hear me out. And yes, there's a little source of light in the corner here from my laptop. But if you were to say that the field of statistics has racist foundations or origins, well, you could do it by talking about eugenics. You might have heard that term before, but if you don't know what eugenics is, if you go and search for it, you're going to possibly get different versions of things. But if you just want your standard dictionary definition, I knew where I was going. Maybe you didn't. All right. The study of how to arrange reproduction, making babies within a human population to increase the occurrence of heritable characteristics regarded as desirable. All right. Where does this come from? Well, we can trace this back to Sir Francis Galton. Now, if you know anything about the history of statistics, you might think, hey, that name sounds familiar too. Yeah, he had a lot to do with the beginnings of statistics. Think of the normal distribution. Think of that bell-shaped curve that many people are familiar with. Guess where we get that from. Now, Galton's also interesting because he comes from a family that you might say had good genes, if you were into that sort of thing. Have we heard that recently? Having good genes. Where have we heard that? All right, but Galton had a famous cousin, Charles Darwin. We know what Charles Darwin did, right? Origin of the species, the very idea of evolution, natural selection. And he was talking about all sorts of animal species, but Galton really wanted to take this and apply it to human beings, and particularly how you got successful human beings. Now, he not only has a famous cousin, Darwin also had a famous father or grandfather. Actually, that's going to bother me, but who wrote a famous work. Now that's really going to bother me. All right, so I did check because it was bothering me. Erasmus Darwin was the grandfather of Charles Darwin, and he was a British physician, poet, natural philosopher, scientist, and his most influential work was a work called Zoonomia, not Zootopia, not Zoologica, Zoonomia. All right, well, he was successful. He had successful descendants. They had successful relatives. Folks like Galton are like, well, we're probably successful because those genes, I might not be using the word genes yet, those genes that are getting passed down, those characteristics getting passed down in the successful families, that's what's making us successful. And so Galton is largely considered sort of the founder of eugenics. Now, importantly, if you look up eugenics and you look in multiple places, multiple sources, what you will see is the word discredited or debunked appearing, over and over again. All right, because eugenics is considered a largely debunked idea, a racially biased idea, because Galton, in addition to trying to explain, successful people, they're successful because, it's passed down in families, not because the rich stay rich and the poor stay poor, that sort of thing, because, it's nice to have resources. He also applied this to racial differences. And in fact, a lot of the beginnings of statistics had to do with making comparisons. The very concept of statistical significance, which is, it's definitely going to be included in most high school or college level statistics classes. Statistical significance, null hypothesis significance testing, which is largely the norm in fields like mine in psychology. It was begun as a way of comparing different races, or at least that was a major function. So, problematic beginnings? Yeah, many would say so. Now, some other big names in the foundations of statistics, those early pioneers in statistics. You have Pearson, Pearson, like Pearson's R, Pearson's product moment coefficient, and many other things, but that most statistics students, that's probably what they're going to think of first. And Fisher, if you don't know the many statistics that are named after Fisher, he also is the developer, the pioneer in analysis of variance, ANOVA. They're big deals. The three, Galton and Pearson and Fisher, are kind of like the three pioneers that really got statistics as we know it started. They were into eugenics. And in fact, University College London, where they did their pioneering work, recently it was 2018, I believe, but fairly recently, they had some controversy when they found out that what we would consider a neo-Nazi organization, a sort of a white supremacist organization, was holding conferences there. And it wasn't the statistics faculty that was holding the conferences there, but they selected that location because historically it had been important in the eugenics movements, and the eugenics movement did very much feed the Nazi racial hygiene idea and the things that they did in the name of that goal. And so they actually took the names of these guys off of buildings after the controversy. It was sort of likened to taking down the Confederate statues in the American South, including my city of New Orleans. They were saying, well, what are they doing? Why are they taking the names off the buildings? It's because, even though we associate them with, that correlation coefficient, with this statistical procedure that we use for a lot of experiments, and, we're using the normal distribution for all sorts of educational testing. Originally a lot of this had to do with eugenics. Now, that normal curve, that bell curve that I mentioned that many people are familiar with, originally when Galton was working with and proposing the idea, he actually said that he proposed that each race had its own bell curve. And he did believe that different races had different, means, different center points. He didn't see it as like the all of humanity being on one bell curve. And, so right away, we had this idea that he strongly believed in that certain people and certain races just were qualitatively different, and that they would have their own distribution, their own set of measurements. And of course, when you have someone who is a respected scientist, it gives that legitimacy, it gives that scientific backing. So people who were elitist, people who were racist, they now felt emboldened. They felt justified in their elitism and their racism because here it's based on science. Does that sound sounding familiar in certain ways? And also, interestingly, there's been a lot of attention lately on, reproduction and having babies and things like that. Towards the end of his life, Galton gave an influential talk where he regretted, he lamented that people had not come on board enough with eugenics, and he was alarmed that people were just marrying anybody, that they weren't considering the babies they were going to be making. They weren't taking eugenics into account to, marry somebody that would give a good product. And now Pearson looked up to Galton, as a sort of religious prophet, or he used the word prophet. He said that eugenics was the directed and self-conscious evolution of the human race, and that Galton had understood this with the enthusiasm of a prophet. So he really looked up to Galton and felt like he was, he was leading the way in doing things correctly. And Pearson spoke out about how conflict war between races was inevitable, and he felt it was very important to win so that the good stock would win. In fact, he was very much in favor of the genocide of the indigenous people in the Americas. He felt like this was not a tragedy, that this was an accomplishment, that it was a good way of getting rid of the bad stock and letting the superior race come in and, use the land to its best to make the place better. And then we have Fisher, another big name, and gave many things to statistics. One thing that students may be very familiar with is the t-test that many of my students have possibly not so great memories of having to compute and interpret. He also looked up to Galton and admired his take on eugenics. And one thing that Fisher was known for speaking up about was the inverse relationship. To students, you may recognize that, like, do you mean a negative correlation? Yeah. The negative correlation between fertility and, how did he, I'm trying to remember how he worded it, but basically being, high value people, that basically the valuable people in society had less babies than those that were on the lower rungs of what we might call socioeconomic status. And he was one of those people to point that out, like, hey, why, we're the good people, we're the good stock. Why are we having less babies? And Fisher is also known for advocating for the idea of involuntary sterilization of what he called feeble-minded, or grave transmissible defects that that you should not let some people reproduce. So just looking at these three pioneers in the field, would we say that statistics is racist? That is a bit of a far-reaching statement. We could say that the foundations were definitely tied to eugenics. But one thing that we know, another controversy that we've had in the social sciences recently, especially in social psychology, is, criticism of the practice of p-hacking. That you can do your objective statistics correctly, but you can do you can engage in questionable practices to make your results say what you want to say. And this practice of using the p-value for null hypothesis significance testing, we can trace it back to these pioneers that I've been discussing. Statistics are all about how you use them. They do provide techniques for objective analysis of data that hopefully was collected in an objective, empirical manner. As scientists, as human beings, we have to be cautious and careful and aware of our own biases when we do our research. Even if we are focusing on the statistics, the part that seems strictly objective, like, oh, hey, that's just math. Math can be manipulated. Math can be used to push an agenda. So we do have to be careful and cautious with how we conduct our research and interpret our research to keep ourselves honest about our own biases. So, do what you will with that information. I know some students will appreciate any opportunity to trash talk statistics, especially the ones that did not enjoy their statistics class. Almost said sadistics there. Whenever I do that accidentally, students do love it. All right, but always do your statistics responsibly.